I must admit, this session I must go entirely by my memory because I hardly got a day. I was never prepared for the sessions. I thought there would be plenty of resource persons. I don't need to speak. But doesn't matter. After all, I've been here since how long? It shouldn't be a matter at all. What I thought in this session is, I thought I would title it as text and film text. What do I mean by that? You know, what I thought is women text. When I mean to say text and women text I have in my mind. With the awakening of nationalist question in India, women question also became quite significant. People like Keshava Chandra Sen, Tagore family, excuse me, Tagore family in Bengal. It was also Indian Renaissance, you can call it. And Ranade, Phule, many more. And Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar in Bengal. Many were compassionate about women. And they want, yes? Nagraj Murthy, please mute yours. Thank you. You have done it. I was talking about the kind of awakening to women question that was taking place in India. Those were also the days when many pre-colonial women, I wouldn't call them activists, women who would influence the society, people like Rokhaya Shekhawat Hussain, or people like Sarla Devi Chaudrani, much before her Kadambari Devi, Swarna Kumari Devi, Tagore family was enlightened. And it was Keshava Chandra Vidyasen's, Keshava Chandra Sen's attempt to marry off his daughter Suniti Devi to the king of, what place is that? Right now, it's in Bengal only. Over the period of time, I'll recall that name. He wanted to marry off his daughter to a prince. And then this age of consent for marriage was 14, I believe. It was decided by this Arya Samaja, and Arya Samaja was formed by Dayanand Saraswati, the Brahma Samaja. Okay. But Keshava Chandra Sen, what he did was, after marrying his daughter to a prince, when she was 13 itself, there was a split in Brahma Samaja. We are all aware of it. But then this kind of marriage of his daughter to a prince started a point where even the people of upper middle class would go abroad and they would learn some of the ways of the West. Okay, that was the time where there was this woman that became a very huge, big case over the period of time. Again, I would recall the name. What
Suniti Devi, madam. Suniti Devi.
No, Suniti Devi's name I said. There was one young lady who was married in her childhood. Her father stepfather happened to be a doctor. And then, you know, later when she reached her puberty, she refused to go to her husband's house. It became an issue actually. You know, she was about to be imprisoned. Then she wrote to the Queen of England, and the Queen of England allowed her to be away from the family. She didn't marry all her life. She became a doctor. I think over the period of time, I'll remember her name. Anyway, such things started happening. There was an awareness in society to women's question, and they wanted to give education to women. You wouldn't even imagine how hard it was for us to get education. You know, it's Justice Ranade's wife Ramabai. She says, when she was a child widow, Mahadeva Ranade, Justice Mahadeva Ranade married her. And you know, the first day when she went to her husband's room, what he told her was to learn alphabets and learn to read and write. This was the lesson given to her. But when she came out of her husband's room in the Maharashtra is extremely cold, I tell you, like other places in the north. She would be poured cold water to sanctify her from the so-called pollution of education, which was done to Mahadeva Ranade's wife, Ramabai Ranade. Such was the extent, because they believed that if women get education, they are bound to be widows. Their husbands are going to die. That was the notion which was there. Krupabai Satyanathan writes her Saguna, where she speaks of her brother Bhaskar, who influenced her to become a doctor, but she doesn't become. Anandibai Joshi, first doctor, who went abroad but could not withstand the weather. She came back without studying medicine. And there was Cornelia Sorabji. It was a new awakening. Okay. My point is not that. I am not going to speak about this background. My point is just this. There was an awakening among, in fact, the awakening started among men. It was the people like Keshava Chandra Sen, Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar, Rajaram Mohan Rai, and Jyotiba Phule, Ranade, and many more. They took up this women question and they wanted to bring in certain change in society. In fact, there is a lot of controversy about Gandhi bringing women into politics. Our politics are the mainstream. You know, some people argue that women were already there in the mainstream of society, or they were fighting for the cause of their equality or their position in society. Their status was already improved. Gandhi is simply attributed with these many things. But we cannot forget one thing about Gandhi. What he does is, one of the reasons why he brings in this spinning wheel to India, he gives 3 reasons. You know, it is in Mira Behan's autobiography, she mentions. The first reason that he gives is that India is an agrarian country. Being an agrarian country, half of the year people would be uneducated. They will not have unemployed, not uneducated, unemployed. They will be without any job at work. So when they are without job at work, they need something to be done. So spinning the wheel. Why spinning the wheel? That was the time when all the cotton that grew in India was taken to Yorkshire of England. There they would, from our cotton, raw cotton, they would weave the clothes and would sell it off for very high prices. So he wanted to break that economic policy or the kind of exploitation that England was doing. Okay. And the third reason that he gives is he wanted not just the farmers to take part in this movement. He wanted children, women, and the old people to take part in this movement. That's why spinning wheel. Okay. And spinning wheel, spinning khadi was something which was very crucial those days. Anyway, let me get back to that point of how there was an awareness which was created by men. And even among literary a literary section of society, there was a compassion with which women were treated. You know, writer like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, you know, he writes a novel with a title Devi Chaudrani. And in Devi Chaudrani, what he does is, he makes, it's a novel which is named after the protagonist. Okay. And eponymous novel. It's an eponymous novel. What happens in that novel is, the protagonist is married to her husband in childhood. For some reason, the marriage gets broken, but those were the days when once a woman is married, she was bound to be in the family circle. So what happens to this woman is, she goes away from her, she is not allowed in her husband's house, but she goes away. But when she goes away, she is caught by a Dacoit king. You can call him almost a king, because though he is a Dacoit, he is like Robin Hood. He is with some spiritual attainments. He would do yoga. He would do all sorts of martial arts. He is an expert in martial arts. He would do so many things, but he is almost a master of so many arts with a connection to higher principle in life. When he gets hold of this young lady, very young she was, by then itself she was sent out of her husband's house. He trains her with martial arts. He trains her with some spiritual attainments. He teaches her meditation. But after his death, this young lady becomes the mistress of that Dacoit troop. And what happens is, in the novel, her husband who happens to be a businessman, while he was taking a voyage, he gets into the hands of this Dacoit troop, of which the leader of which happens to be this Devi Chaudrani. And you know what she does is, she catches hold of her husband, and when he is caught, she is the leader of this gang. She makes him press her legs. She makes him do the service, which was a very unconventional concept to those days. And Bankim Chandra Chatterjee modeled this Devi Chaudrani with an extraordinary virtue of Mother Durga. Mother Durga is a form of Shakti, okay, who has worshipped in northeastern part of India with a great ardor. And Devi Chaudrani thus becomes a model of all virtue to Bengalis, modeled after Bankima Chandra Chatterjee's notion of womanhood. On the one hand, while he seems to assert the conventional values for women, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee also makes it very unconventional, where a husband presses the legs of the wife. It was something unimaginable. I would also mention here, Ashok Pagda, is there a problem, sir? Okay, I don't think so. You know, there is something else which I would like to bring into your notice. The first autobiography which was written in Bengal was Amar Jeevan, which was written by Rash Sundari Devi. In days where one could not think of oneself as an individual, there was this woman called Rash Sundari Devi who learned literacy by stealth. You know how she learned her literacy? She would see her sons led. And the reason why she learned literacy was all the more interesting. She learned literacy to read Chaitanya's work. What is that work of Chaitanya in Bengal? Diponjan Mukherjee, would you help me?
Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Chaitanya Charita? Yeah, I think I'll recall. Look at it, how bad I am. You know, to read that, she was spiritual. In fact, the first autobiography in India is by Bahina Bai. And that is like in Tripadi, which was written in Marathi language, which was also mostly spiritual, or an expression of association with the higher principle, is the very idea of that autobiographical work. In Rash Sundari Devi's work, actually, Rash Sundari Devi learns Chaitanya Bhagavata, that is, okay, to read Chaitanya Bhagavata written by Chaitanya Kavi. she wanted to read this, learn literacy. She learns it by stealth. She takes a work, 2 letters from her son's, this one, and she practices on sand. And there are innumerable instances where she says she goes without food for 3 days, 4 days, and she doesn't ever complain about it. And she is a sort of a woman who dared to speak of her life after her death, her husband's death also, as something blessed. And what she does is, in fact, it is Rabindranath Tagore's brother, Jyotirindranath Tagore, writes a foreword to her autobiography. And he says that when I started reading this autobiography, I wanted to underline the important sentences in the autobiography. And when I started reading the autobiography, I discovered that I ended up underlying the whole of the autobiography. That is what Jyotirindranath Tagore says. What does he mean by that? This was one autobiography where she speaks of her experiences, where she struggled hard to get literacy and read Chaitanya Bhagavata. And then she speaks of her association with the higher principle, which you may call divine, in many contexts. Like once she had lost her nose ring, which is supposed to be very auspicious for a married woman. She was very unhappy about it. She was unhappy about it. But then after many years, maybe many decades, she finds the same nose ring in the mud of her wall. You know, she explains some such things. And then she also dares to say that her life was blessed when even after her husband's death. Why would I say that it's a surprise? She dares to say that. She had the audacity to say that, I would even say, because life of women was very, very pathetic if the woman was a widow. I'll give you innumerable examples from our own culture. Indira Goswami's Sin, Paniyama by M.K. Indira, Litambika Antarjanam's innumerable stories, including the Goddess of Revenge and all the stories spoke about any corner of society. But this happened only in the highest strata of society. Brahmin women were Nambudiri women, or Brahmin women, or even Chitpavan Brahmin women. They were made to suffer because of widowhood. Widowhood was a stigma in society. That's why this bringing of sati, prohibition of sati system was something somewhat very crucial. Amidst those many things, Rashsundari dared to speak of her life as blessed one after her husband's death. Irrespective of their ages, a widow's life was really a curse. There were many movies which were made even by many directors in Hindi, old Hindi movies, about the plight of women. When there was this movement, women movement or women question was taken up by men initially, there was a response by people with their compassion and sympathy to their viewing of womanhood, with the, I wouldn't call it positive note, with a sympathy, they would view it. There was an awareness. That is why widow remarriages, people like Mahadeva Ranade married a young widow. Young widows were married. Young widows in the sense they had to be very young. You know, the marriages would take place between people. If a husband would be 95-year-old, a girl would be 6-7-year-old. Such would be the marriages that were in vogue those days. And as a result, invariably women would become widows. And widowhood was a curse, and a woman was not allowed to, either she had to be at the mercy of her immediate family, parents' family. As long as her parents would be alive, her life would be all right. With the death of her parents, her life would be pathetic. Lalitambika Antarjanam discusses it. And society would view her as an object of condemnation. Then there came writers who started bringing some reformatory measures. Among them is crucial a woman like Pandita Ramabai. Okay, Pandita Ramabai. Why was she called Pandita? She was a very learned scholar by herself. She happens to be the daughter of Anantapadmanabha Shastri Dongre, himself a thorough scholar of Sanskrit, who fought with many Sanskrit scholars and then argued and won the case that he showed it from our own religious text that women can be taught Sanskrit. That was the argument that Anantapadmanabha Shastri Dongre won, and he taught his wife Indira, who happens to be Ramabai's mother, Sanskrit education. And he then, because of his, though he earned a lot of money because of his religious works, he gives it away, he donates all the money for religious causes, and he becomes again very poor. But he is also a very orthodox Brahmin. He has to go by certain method itself. His life has to go by certain methods. As a result, he has to die out of abject poverty, and they lose every possession that they have had. The family, they had to move from one place to another for their livelihood, begging food. And Pandita Ramabai was taught Sanskrit by her mother Indira, Sanskrit, and gradually she loses her mother, and she had only one brother who also dies. She goes to Calcutta, and then she learns from Dayanand Saraswati some of the Vedic learnings. And this Ramabai, is it Ramabai? Yeah, Ramabai, but she is called Pandita Ramabai because she debated along with many scholars and she won the case. That's why she is called Pandita Ramabai. She notes that in Bengal, there were so many widows. Innumerable widows were there in Bengal. So what she did was she started Sharda Sadan in 1884, if I remember right. She started Sharda Sadan, which was shelter, which provided asylum to many of the widows, where they were taught music, or they were taught some sorts of skills like cooking or weaving or knitting, etc., etc. Thereby stitching, thereby their livelihood will be taken care of to some extent. That is what she did. She herself becomes a widow, and then she goes to America in her 25th year with her child, with her daughter, and there in America she learns English and she is compelled to get converted to Christianity, Pandita Ramabai. Because of her conversion, there is an argument that she is not recognized by many of our nationalists. For instance, Bal Gangadhar Tilak did not admit her at all. He did not appreciate Ramabai, Pandita Ramabai. She was the one who moved all over India on her foot, and she engaged herself in academic debate with many of the scholars, and she tried to bring in a social change and a reformation in society. Okay, this kind of social engagement that women like Pandita Ramabai and people like Mahadeva Ranade and Ishwarachandra Vidyasagar and Tagore family, Keshavachandra Sen family, and many more were involved actually. They were all trying to bring in this kind of change in society. Then there was an awareness among writers also, writers like Bankim and Sharath, they started portraying women with a very, very positive light. They were actually, Sharath's women are supposed to be extremely appealing. He is supposed to have a great um, awareness of a woman's uh, emotions and women's mind. That is what is said of his novels. Actually, Devdas is one such I can give you. Devdas, not the very glorified version of Devdas, where you happen to see very gaudy sort of jewels and dresses that appear in our movies. Devdas, where a young lady who was deeply in love with a neighbor who also loves her because of social strata or social conditioning, he denies his, or maybe to some extent, a male ego, which wouldn't let him allow himself to the love of this woman. Later, he suffers a lot. That's a different thing. But her life is made pathetic. It was a pathetic story of a woman who is made to marry an elderly man and accept children who were elder to her as her own stepchildren, as her own children. Such was the fate of women those days. And Karma Bhumi by Premchand is also similar to that. Karma Bhumi, not Karma Bhumi, Nirmala, I believe, Nirmala, where the the husband is very suspicious of the camaraderie between the stepson and the stepmother. The husband who married a young lady as his wife, he grows suspicious the moment the son develops a camaraderie with the stepmother. They are of the equal age, and naturally grows a friendship, camaraderie between the stepson and the mother. The man who is unsure of his own bondage with the wife, he starts doubting the relationship between them. And people like Premchand, people like Sharat Chandra Chatterjee, people like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, they all, and later writers, they had progressive writers. They started having a sort of a sympathy towards women. That is where you have Isma Chugtai, Anis Jain, and these many writers who wrote on widowhood. M.K. Indira Goswami, Lalitambika Antarjanam, and even Pratibha Ray for that matter from Odisha, and many more writers. They started bringing in the problems of women in their write-up. And you know, initially when they wrote, even Ruqayya Shekhawat Hussain, you must read, if I don't know, anybody here who are aware of Ruqayya Shekhawat Hussain? Anybody among the participants? She is a very fascinating writer, I tell you. You know, Ruqayya Shekhawat Hussain is somebody from Bengal who is a contemporary of Sarala Devi Chowdhury. You may ask me, who is Sarala Devi Chowdhury? Our Janagana Mana, you know, that is our national anthem is music composition to this national anthem is done by Sarala Devi Chowdhury. And Sarala Devi Chowdhury happens to be Tagore's niece, okay? Rabindranath Tagore's niece. She is the daughter of Janaki Natha Ghoshal and Swarna Kumari Devi, who Swarna Kumari Devi, who is the elder sister of Tagore. She was brought up initially in her father's place, but then she came back to Jorashanko, the family house of Tagore. So she had the rich culture, independent nature of her father Janaki Natha Ghoshal, and also the rich culture from Jorashanko household, Tagore household. And Sarala Devi Chowdhury is very crucial to our understanding of women's history in India, because you know what happens is Sarala Devi Chowdhury, being the second daughter of Swarna Kumari Devi, was very independent. Until 33 years, she did not marry. She wanted to be independent. She even came down to our Mysore, I mean Karnataka, to pursue her independent profession. She had come, but then she had a bitter experience in Mysore, it seems, and she was asked to go back to her mother's place. There was a false news given to her saying that her mother is not well. When she went back, she was made to marry a widow from Punjab called Rambhuj Chaudhary. And in their wedding, they got a son called Deepak. That's a different thing. That's personal note about her. But then, there was something extraordinary about Sarala Devi Chaudhrani. She was very sympathetic to this extremist movement which was occurring initially. And she was the one who was editing this magazine called Bharati from Tagore family. She edited for a long time. Her sister Hiranmayi was also very talented. And she was so instrumental in finding a Akhila Bharata Mahila Mandal in India. Akhila Bharata Mahila Mandal was there. This is quite informative. Some of you may feel really bored, but I think to understand the background of Indian womenhood, you need to know a little of it. Anyway, she edited this magazine Bharati, in which she recorded the least kind of protest against Britishers, and she made all others to contribute other than Tagore families. Okay, and she even trained many of the Bengali young men. Bengali people are supposed to be effeminate. Bengali men are supposed to be. That was one sort of a notion about Bengali men that used to prevail those days. They were given some sort of a physical training in akharas, akhara or akhada, if you want to say. Okay, there they were given training physically, and she somehow equipped the nation for independence. That way her contribution is very much both to literary history, to women's culture, as well as to nationalist movement. She is very crucial, and she was a very good musician by herself. Our Sujatha Kriplani was supposed to be a very good musician. The first woman chief minister of India from UP. She learned her music from Sarala Devi Chaudhrani. Okay, and she was there. People like Sarala Devi Chaudhrani and Rokhaya Shekhawat Hussain. Rokhaya Shekhawat Hussain was a few years elder to Sarala Devi Chaudhrani. She was taught Sanskrit, not Sanskrit, Bengali and English language by her brother in stealth again. When all were sleeping, she was taught these two languages, and she writes. She was made to marry a widower, which was a normal practice those days. Marrying an elderly man who was an IAS officer, I believe, those days. And when husband goes out, she writes a piece of work in English called Sultana's Dream. Okay. What is the Sultana's Dream? It is viewed as a scientific novel. Actually, it speaks of a narrative where a young lady dreams. Actually, the very narrative is a slippery sort of a narrative. Deliberately, this dream narrative is employed by Rokhaya Shekhawat Hussain. What she does is, in her dream, the narrator is made to visit an ideal world, utopia of women, and which is devoid of any sort of limitation. And there, Rokhaya Shekhawat Hussain takes up many evils of patriarchy and responds very individualistically and independently to those patriarchal evils, and she suggests solutions of her own. And her views on the jewels that we women wear are very interesting. Why do you want to bind yourself with gold jewels? Why do, if you are so happy with those jewels, why don't you deck up with iron? Why do you want to deck up bind yourselves with gold? That is what is argument. She also has written Padmarag and other works. Many of them were written in English itself. Sultana's Dream is written in English. I mentioned Sultana's Dream also to connect it to another text by Lalitambika Antarjanam, which is titled as Goddess of Revenge. You know, there is a dream narrative in Goddess of Revenge also. What happens in the story is, there is a young lady who is married to Nambudiri young lady, who is married to a young man of her community. And when she is married, she is all happiness in the wedding. She is all happiness because the husband is all, am I putting you all to sleep? I can see some of you are really tired. Okay, you know, she is married to a young man, and initial days of her wedding are extraordinarily happy one. She discovers physically, emotionally, psychologically a companion in her husband. But all of a sudden, her husband loses all fancy for the wife, and he becomes completely aloof from her. She pleads him, and he brings some prostitutes home. She pleads him, she coaxes him, she does whatever is possible in her limits to control her husband. But the husband, if not control, to be in touch with the husband, but nothing succeeds. Then she asks her husband, what is it that pleases you? Go and be a prostitute, he says. And then after some days, the husband goes to a prostitute and he finds her extremely attractive. Extremely attractive. He enjoys everything, and he tells the prostitute that I haven't seen anybody who is as attractive as you are in all my life, he says. Then the prostitute tells him, are you sure that you haven't seen anybody like me? She asks. Then he stares at her, and then he says, Tatri, is that you? And he's so shattered that he gets back. It was none other than his own wife, who was abandoned by him without finding any way. She had turned out to be a prostitute. And a prostitute who would draw innumerable customers to her, and who had been extraordinarily popular, so popular that her husband was forced to go to her without knowing that it is his wife. Now she is dragged to a trial. And in the trial, Tatri brings in innumerable names of the respectable people who conducted the trial. And it was so shocking that she was then casted out. Cast Me Out, if you will, is the title of the collection of anthology which is written by Lalitambika Antarjanam. She is cast out from the community. That's a different thing. This is what happens about this protagonist, Tatri. And this is told to us by the narrator in such a way that she is asleep. She is, after day's work, she is almost asleep. And when she is asleep, what happens is she feels that somebody is before her. And she asks who you are. I'm Tatri. And Tatri is a name the Nambudiri community is so scared of even uttering, especially the respected community, because Tatri is a prostitute who had gone out of the boundaries of respectable society of Nambudiri family. Anyway, what happens is she narrates the story of how she was subjected to this kind of ill treatment by her husband and how she was compelled to take revenge. And this was her version of story. Through dream narration, Lalitambika Antarjanam compels her readers to be compassionate with the protagonist, and she brings in her point of view. Exactly that is what is done by Rokhaya Shekawat Hussain. Dream narrative was one sort of narrative which was there in the earlier writings of women. That was a strategy, that was a device, technical device that they have adopted to speak things which they otherwise did not dare to speak of. Okay? Dream narrative was something very crucial to these women writers once upon a time. A little later, what happens is the narrative technique. I'm not actually, my lectures are from memory, I must tell you. I'm not even comprehensive. I might have left so many writers who are very crucial also, but this at the same time will draw a pattern to what I need to say. There comes a next level of writers who would use child narrators. You know, Ismat Chughtai's short stories, or Vaidehi's short stories, or who else is the other one? Yeah, Ismat. Very recently also there is one writer. What is her name? The Lies My Mother Told Me is the short stories title. You know, these are the writers. I'll tell you who the writer is. It's at the tip of somewhere in my memory. It will come. You know, what they do is through the child narrators, they would explain, they would express the kind of injustices that prevail. That's not a new technique to us. Huckleberry Finn is narrated by a 13-year-old boy, right? It's in first person narration. All of us are aware. And how Huckleberry Finn critiques the American society is what we discover. In his rejection to be civilized, he says that the civilization that you speak of as higher is so empty. There is no civilization. There is sheer duplicity, hypocrisy in the world that you are living in. That is what Huckleberry Finn tells. Through Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain criticizes the American society. That's not a new device at all. It has been employed by others. But among women narrators, I would take up, I would just give you examples of Akku, or A Memory Called Amachi. Both are the stories which are written by Vaidehi, where there is a question of insanity. Insanity is seen as an instrument from our society to control women. Women can never be angry. Women can only be hysteric or mad. Are you mad? How can you raise your voice? Are you a woman at all? Is a question that our society asks if a woman gets angry. Women cannot afford to be angry at all. You have angry young men in our movies. We don't have angry young women at all. There used to be Shanti, Vijay Shanti in Telugu. Maybe to some extent Malashri. But angry young woman is a concept which is not known to us at all. Because women cannot be angry at all. If a woman gets angry, she must be insane or hysteric. Are you mad? How can you raise your voice like that? Are you civilized at all? Women must speak in low tone. I would say every individual must speak in low tone, not with higher. So when these child narrators narrated the story, they were devised or strategically employed by the writers to bring in the social injustice or the social discrimination which prevailed in society. They could not directly say that from our, nor even the matured audience, matured character in the novel could address the question. It had to be a young lady or a young man who is just entering into a vacant consciousness. In Akko, there is a young girl who finds Akko's insanity as something abnormal. Who doesn't find it abnormal? When she finds that others consider Akko's abnormality as abnormality, she notices that how the others are double standard. There is Akko's brother who has an illegitimate relationship, but that is all right for the family. Okay, even in Arundhati Roy's this one, Chaco Ammo's brother can afford to have illegitimate relationship out of wedding because it is man's needs. Woman's needs are never addressed to. Of course, Ammo doesn't go for a physical requirement at all. When Ammo falls in love with Veluta, it is because that she finds a camaraderie between her children and Veluta in a great light. Actually, it is Rahel who starts the narration of the novel, The God of Small Things. You know, she is very comfortable on the back of Veluta. And Veluta himself is not an ordinary young man. Veluta and Chaco, you find a very sharp contrast between each other. If Chaco can destroy all the world around him, Veluta is somebody who is able to construct the world from the destroyed things. Such contrast is very much visible to us. Anyway, even there, Rahel is 7-year-old when the novel begins. Okay, from there, it's a stream of consciousness technique which has been employed. It's started from the 7-year-old narrator's point of view that the novel begins. Here also, in the stories that I mentioned, Akku or a memory called Ammachi, the sympathy of the young narrator is for the insane Akku and Ammachi, who is supposed to be an eccentric woman to be a woman at all in a rigid convention orthodox society. What these narrators do is, Vinay, is there anything very funny? Vinay Kumar? Vinay Kumar, are you there? I'm sure he is in different world. Anyway, I was talking about this kind of technique which has been devised by the writers, women writers. In Chautika Jaura by Isma Chuktai, again there is a young narrator who witnesses that her sister Kubra is waiting to get married. On the one hand, the mother wants the daughter to be married. On the other, she doesn't want the girl to talk to any man at all. And she imagines it that she would attract men, probably very idealistically. That's her assumption. The moment she hears that her distant relative's son comes to the family, what she does is she prepares the whole household for the invitation of the nephew, so that she assumes that this nephew would marry her first daughter. Instead of marrying the first daughter, the nephew of this woman rapes the second girl and he goes away. Chautika Joda actually is Joda is a clothing which a young lady wears on the 4th day of her wedding to symbolize the consummation in wedding. Forget about the consummation, the very sanctity associated with the wedding is denied to the family because of the poverty that they are living in on the one hand. On the other hand, the kind of the social expectations that are there in society from women. Women are supposed to be very subtle, submissive, docile, soft, kind, whatnot. So these are the kinds of the narrations which we come across. Connected to it, there comes a recent story. Ashita, the writer of the story, it is from Malayalam. This story has been translated in Katha. The title of the story is The Lies My Mother Told Me. Mothers are the first teachers of a child. We are all told. Here is a narration by a young lady, young girl, who says that the narration begins like this. My mother has lied to me more than anyone else in this world. It's from my memory, not exact sentence, but that is the crux of the sentence. She is the one who has lied to me the most. And the short story ends with a note that, after all, I have lied the most to my mother. You know, what happens in that story is, this is a young girl who witnesses her father, Achan, who is extremely strict with the wife and daughter, whereas the same father who is so strict with the wife and the daughter is all happiness and all smiles and talkative when he is with a distant relative, Chellamanaka. And Chellamanaka is all smiles and all fragrances and all beauty when compared to her mother, who is with Basmakuri and all simplicity by herself. And mother, when what happens is, Mother is extremely upset with Challamanaka because there is an illegitimate relationship between Challamanaka and the narrator's father, that is her mother's husband. She is extremely unhappy. And one fine day, the narrator learns that Challamanaka committed suicide. And the narrator asks her mother, "Mother, are you happy today because Challamanaka is no more?" In fact, mother is happy because she thinks that Challamanaka is an obstacle to her life, her happiness. Her husband's attention is diverted to Challamanaka, so he doesn't pay attention to her. That's her notion. But actually, Achan, after the death of Challamanaka, becomes all the more aloof and he doesn't come back home. And one fine day, he was almost a threatening figure initially, but then he becomes ineffectual and gradually he dies. Then the girl grows into a young lady and she gets married, and the mother advises her, "Remember, the way to a man's heart is through stomach." And the narrator says that for many years, her very life was confined to movement from kitchen to room, room to kitchen, and to children's room. Only to find out one fine day, a woman with all flesh in her husband's bedroom. And she gets back to her mother's house, and mother asks her, she is reading Ramayana now, the old lady, her mother, she asks, "You are all right, right? Balu is all right, right?" Then this woman says, "Yes, Amma, everything is all right. Balu is also all right. I'm going back later." And the story ends with a note that, after all, I have lied the most to my mother. It's an extremely disturbing story because we find three models of women here. One is Challamanaka, who seems to be out of the confinement of social decency because she is all laughter. She is all decorative. She is a mistress, not respectable. Whether her life was happy one? If her life was happy one, why did she commit suicide? And narrator's mother, who is so strict and so disciplined, so religious, led a very simple life. Was she happy? Happiness was nowhere to her. Her life was so full of lies. And the model of these two was available to the young lady. Was she happy? She assumed that she was happy, but she couldn't be. She was not really happy. Similar thing is what I find in That Long Silence. The model of these three women, in the arena of That Long Silence, I find women of all sorts. The protagonist Jaya, who was renamed as Suhasini by her husband Mohan, you know, what she does is she tries to fit into the family circle. She does her best and she keeps doing it. Only a break in between makes her realize that all her sacrifices were futile. She now has to reinvent herself when they shift from Dadar to Churchgate house because Mohan has some problem in his profession. What it is not spelled out properly in the text. He is in trouble. Because he is in trouble, he feels sorry for the people in the street who become houseless for some misfortune. Jaya, the novel is in stream of consciousness technique and it is in first person narration. Shashi Deshpande started writing when she was 35 years old, quite a mature age to understand life. Indira Goswami's autobiography, an unfinished autobiography, was written when she was in her 20s, early 20s. An extraordinarily matured autobiography it is. One of my favorite autobiographies. In mid-30s, when Shashi Deshpande wrote this novel, she provides us with innumerable models of women, starting from Jaya's life, around whom the novel revolves. You know, there is Kusum, who happens to be a relative of Jaya, but she was insane and she commits suicide. Jaya says at a juncture, at least she had the guts or courage to be insane. Do I have? Jaya befriends a neighbor, Mr. Kamath. Mr. Kamath seems to be all admiration for Jaya. Jaya has got very sharp features. Her marriage with Mohan takes place because of her good looks and also her English education. It is not Jaya's opinion which matters. It is her brother, Dinakar or Divakar. Okay. He is instrumental in marrying of sister Jaya to Mohan. He says he is very good. But later Jaya realizes that actually her brother wanted to get rid of the responsibility of her. And throughout the novel, you come across series of episodes or anecdotes which very loudly speak of the injustice that is prevailing in society. It is in Jaya's childhood that Jaya notes that she and her other relative or cousins, girls are made to work. Jaya says, why should we alone need to work? Why not men? Why not boys? Everybody finds it humorous and everybody laughs at her. Nobody takes it serious at all. Her mother is somebody, Jaya's mother is somebody who is very unconventional, but somebody who can't relate to her children also. Her granny is very conventional, but cannot connect to her mother. There is some Vimala Kaki, who is her relative, who is childless, but she has problematic menstruation. She has problems during her periods. And nobody wants to understand what her problem is. Her daughter-in-law says, as if getting periods is as if a big issue. And Vimla Kaki dies because of the health issue. Nobody bothers about what happens to Vimla Kaki, why she dies. Or there is another relative of her who is with all, Vimla Kaki is without children. There is another relative of hers who is with all children, but only the son would bring the pride in her face. This kind of disparity between son and daughter is something which has been a very prominent idea in Shashi Deshpande. In Roots and Shadows, even in Darkhold No Terrors, even in Small Remedies, these are the only novels that I have read. Though I have bought her autobiography, read a bit of it, I could not complete it yet. You know, this kind of discrimination between boys and girls in society is something which she keeps on spelling out. And there is Naina and Tara, these are the servant women who are beaten up by their husbands. And Naina is pregnant. It reminds me of another novel by Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood, I believe, Edible Woman. Edible Woman, there Clara is also pregnant and she is like having a watermelon in her tummy. She is undernourished. So Naina is also undernourished. And there is also a problem of this one, eve teasing and molestation in public place. She keeps noting it. So the whole novel presents arena of many women characters throughout. I'm sorry, this would become sheer superficial reading in a very short span of time, but still I hope to make a point of what I need to say. What actually through these many characters Shashi Deshpande wants to say, I understand, is that irrespective of one's status, whether one is married or unmarried, whether one is with issues or without issues, whether one is educated or uneducated, whether one is privileged or unprivileged, The status of women in society is second grade. Of course, the novel ends with a positive note where Jaya says that she would, Mohan asks her whether everything is all right. She says, yes, everything is all right. But she questions herself whether everything is really all right. But then she responds to herself saying that why should she think that she alone has changed? Why shouldn't she assume that? Why shouldn't she think that? Even Mohan has a ways of changing. Why shouldn't she allow that scope to her? While doing that, she brings in a lot of myth. One of the very important myths that she employs is from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. She takes an example of two wives of Yajnavalkya, Maitreyi and Katyayini. She uses the image of Maitreyi, who happens to be the spiritual wife of Yajnavalkya, who denied to accept any material wealth from her husband, Yajnavalkya. She said, if material wealth would not give me any sort of fulfillment, I would deny those wealth. Give me something which would provide me with spiritual fulfillment. That is what she asks. Yajnavalkya feels extremely happy about it. There is a dialogue of it in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Let us not go to that. And she uses this image. Shashi Deshpande uses this image in her novel to say that when women insist on one's assertion or individual identity or entity, are they like Maitreyi? If you aspire to be with some fulfillment of higher principle, you must also have grown yourself to the level of Maitreyi. Maitreyi asked that. Did I ask myself for fulfillment? There are multiple imageries like bullock cart imagery. Actually, it's one novel. I think sometimes I must take it up and discuss it in some session, I believe, That Long Silence. It makes an extraordinarily interesting reading where we find that irrespective of one's status, there is an injustice in society. Maybe through the episode of Maitreyi, I feel that Shashi Deshpande also takes up the onus as a woman to rise above the limitations that have been surrounding women. They must grow above those limitations by the self-attempt and be like Brahmavadinis who wanted to attain spiritual fulfillment. Saying this, I will take 5 more minutes and complete it. I would go to the movie Thappad. Thappad, I am sure one of you, Diponchan Mukherjee or somebody said that. Who said that? That he watched the movie? Yeah, Rati has seen that movie. It's a Malayali movie. The movie is about a newly wedded young lady who is really happy. And from the very beginning, not Malayali, Thappad is Hindi movie. I went to the Great Indian Kitchen. Thappad is about a young lady who is happily married. And she says, and on some occasion, she doesn't realize that the married life is not about them. It's about his life, actually. It's about her husband's life alone, which is hinted from the very beginning itself. The man, when she says whether I can drive a vehicle, he says, first learn to make parathas. Pehle paratha to banana seekho, apne haath ko ye karne ke siva, he says. And then he happens to see a woman driver in the road. He says, who allowed women to drive? That is his response. And then, there is such a contempt in this man, which gets manifested at an event. Everything about her surrounds her husband's life, though herself is a gifted young lady. But then she discovers in an unfortunate event where her husband discovers that his greatest ambition to go to London, being a head of a firm or office, fails because of his inefficiency, which he doesn't agree. While he was arguing with his officer, the wife comes in and she tries to stop the husband. Then he slaps on her face before around 40 to 50 guests. The girl, you know, actually even there you find in parallel, there is this life of the young lady, and then the life of her mother and father, life of her father-in-law and mother-in-law, life of the servant woman, that is, and then life of the neighbor, and life of her brother and brother's betrothed, if not betrothed, girlfriend. There are many family relationships, and even the lawyer who called Netra, who is also in a married but subjected to injustice. She is a gifted lawyer, but her husband says that she is married to a gifted lawyer's son. He says it's a privilege that you are married to our family, so you enjoy all position. He says, uh, you know, all such injustice occurs, but when this young lady is subjected to this humiliation, she denies to succumb. She just comes out of the wedding. Physically, she is there, but she is not mentally, emotionally in the wedding. She says that I can't continue with you because I don't love you anymore. And every time she says that, but she is so badly conditioned from the family that, or by her mother, that she always has some sort of a inhibition and doubts about her getting back to family, getting out of the family. She keeps getting back to her husband only to discover that her husband humiliates her again and again without ever apologizing her. But at last, when she is out of the wedding, her husband's officer tells him, see, you slapped your wife. You were angry with us. Could you beat us? Your superiors, men, you had beaten your wife. Was it right? It was not right on your part. You did wrong, he says. And no one else tells him that he did wrong. But she affirmatively says that what he did was unfair. She says, I knew I was a housewife by choice. He would work outside, I would work inside. That was my contention. But that was fair deal. That was a fair deal. What was unfair was thappad. That was unfair. That made me conscious of the so many unfair situations in my life. And you know, thappad actually is a very symbolic movie to me, because he slaps her on the face, but her very quiet and a peaceful resistance, at the same time very emphatic resistance, is a thappad back on the society, which would have this conventional notions in one's mind, where women may be subjected to any sort of humiliation, any sort of limitation a man has is immediately connected to the limitation of a woman. That is not allowed. That is what this woman says. She takes a divorce, but ironically, after she takes divorce, all the relationships get reconciliated. And you know, her husband also apologizes her for the first time. After divorce, he says, he gets back from London, though he was promoted to the position that he wanted to. He says, I have come back from London. Now I realize that you are important. And I realize that I never apologized to you. I should not have done it. And I hope to deserve you in future. That's what he says. That is how all other relationships reconciliate in the novel. Though thappad is, on the one hand, a slap, a physical slap on the woman, actually, Anubhav Sinha, the best part of this movie, and even the Great Indian Kitchen and many movies, are that men are the directors. Mrinal, which one? Lago. Mrinal Lago was the one who is the script writer of this movie, Thappad, a woman that is. But then Anubhav Sinha